So we're going to invite our speakers up now, Andy Revkin and Dr. Alan Rabinowitz.
Yeah.
He's been called the Indiana Jones of wildlife conservation by Time magazine, and he's one of the leading tiger conservationists in the world. And of course, we have an award-winning New York Times journalist here to talk to him. So I'm going to give the floor over.
Boy, there's so many moments in the film and in your life that are significant. The one that really got me, one of the ones that really struck me most viscerally was when you were showing the, on your MacBook, or on your laptop, the villagers, that unbelievable scene of another village killing a tiger that had been predating on them. And as the man said, there was a euphoria. And then you asked that critical question, would you prefer a forest with no tigers? And they immediately were saying no. Was that surprising to you at that point?
None of that was choreographed. I mean, it's difficult doing a film like this because there is so much there's a whole film crew outside of me in the boat doing things which I have to do over and over again. But the village scene, this was truly a trip of exploration. It was truly my first trip into the Sundarbans. It was a real trip to figure out if my organization, Panthera, or I could go into the Sundarbans and really make a difference, or if it was a valuable enough area. I had no idea what the villages would be saying. I had so much wasn't shown in this film as well, because we had 30 days of shooting. I was on that river for 30 days. Seeing that village of tiger widows, there are actually villages called tiger widows, because if somebody has somebody killed by a tiger, believe it or not, instead of being sympathetic, and people are sympathetic, but you're considered bad luck. So you're kind of banished, and they have to go off and live among themselves, the tiger widows. And that's very common in many cultures. You're bad luck if bad things happen to you. But that particular scene was shocking to me, because I fully expected, I was completely empathetic with those people. If I had to go out, if my children had to go out and get water in the backyard and there was a jaguar or a tiger out there, I would kill that animal for the safety of my children. I would, no matter how much I felt that they should survive. My family comes first. I fully expected those people to say, yes, we would like there to be no tigers. Fully expected that. I was actually blown away, and it made so much sense to me. The euphoria was because they had no control. They had no control. They couldn't go out at night from their huts to go to the bathroom, to go to the outhouse, because of how aggressive these tigers were, and they would take free roam of their village. They had no control, and when they saw people gain control of the tiger that came into their village, they felt, well, maybe we could take control of our own lives a little more. But as soon, and it blew me away. It always shocks me how much more people who live with nature, who live with predators, get it more than those in the Western world or more than those in big cities. They get it intuitively. They know nothing about genetics, about biology, about apex predators, but they understand intuitively that if you take the tiger away from their forest, that they're going to lose their way of life. They're going to lose the crabs. They even get that, which is really indirect.
Yeah.
But they get it.
How anomalous is this area compared to some of the other areas you've been in where tiger conservation is being attempted? Or maybe you could just give a sense of the variegation. One thing that's clear to me, and having written about this stuff for a long time, is, and you talk about complexity, there's no simple answer. The animal is the same, but everything around it seems to be different in many places.
This is one of the, if not the only area I've ever been in Tiger Range where the tiger, now they were being killed off. They were being killed, especially in the Bangladesh side. But they had more control over the people's psyche. You've got to understand, the Sundarbans, in a way, it's a perfect conservation area to protect, because other than that major, who was really a wild man, people just do not walk through the Sundarbans. It's just horrendous. You saw me just trying to navigate the mud at the perimeter. It's really horrible going through. So the Sundarbans is accessed and controlled totally on water and by river, and people are afraid to go in. So the tigers, I've never seen a place where the people are so afraid of tigers, and where the tigers, I don't think that they're naturally more aggressive. There's lots of theories that they're more aggressive because they have to drink salt water. That's not true. But these are the most resilient tigers I've ever met. I actually had never visited the Sundarbans in my 30 years. I've worked over 30 years on tigers. And I always pushed aside the Sundarbans because it was isolated. I mean, it's completely cut off from all the other tiger populations. Completely cut off with no real hope of gaining any kind of corridor from there to the next place. It's the place which, with climate change, is going to be underwater the fastest, and the tigers live right there on the very edge, and their habitat will be gone. So I always thought, no, if we have limited time and money, shouldn't go to the Sundarbans. I don't need to think about the Sundarbans. And I was, like so many times in my career, I was wrong. And I should have kept a more open mind. Because that gene pool, losing those tigers, losing that gene pool would be like, this is kind of a funky comparison, but like losing Arnold Schwarzenegger. It'd be losing the Superman of the tigers. You would not want to lose that gene pool, even if we had to proactively use it somehow to re-inseminate others, because those tigers are some of the toughest, most indomitable animals I have ever seen in my life. We're modeling right now how you possibly could recreate corridors. One thing we have learned, if you want to look at climate change, if you want to look at the success of climate change, look at the big cats which survive now. The greatest climate change which ever happened that we know about were the 18 glacial interglacial cycles of the Pleistocene. Massive climate change, more than anything we're predicting right now, pretty far into the future. Massive climate change, 18 different ice ages, during which time worldwide about 80% of the not 80%, not including Africa, about 65% of the megafauna, 80% outside of Africa in the Americas went extinct. Those big things that survived, like the tigers, lions, jaguar, all the big cats, they survived because of one thing. They survived because they had corridors, because they could shift where they were. The things that went extinct, like the woolly mammoth, it took a huge amount of time and effort to force them into extinction. And they went extinct when they were so fragmented that they just couldn't sustain a viable population anymore. We know that what will save, humans can move, humans can shift. Wildlife can only shift if we allow it to. Now, wildlife can shift through the human landscape, a lot of it, not all of it, but especially with the big cats and the apex predators. They can move through human landscape. Bangladesh presents a unique model for us, at least with wildlife. I'm not talking people now, because this is what I'm focusing on. It presents a unique model for trying to figure out how wildlife, which is seemingly doomed because of climate change, if not doomed sooner for other reasons, how you deal with it. Because walking away is not an option. I will not walk away from anything. That's what we can solve this. We as the human race can solve this. And if there's one thing I really learned on this trip, it's that people are the key to the equation of saving wildlife.
I assume there's some questions up here, so I'm going to save time for them to,
Sorry if I'm
and I'll
talking.
repeat them. No, this is fine. I also, one of the other scenes, just as a scene that really captivated me was that the little play that was happening with the Gandhi, the kid as Gandhi covered with mud.
We didn't arrange that.
Can you just sort of tell us what was going on? Where was that and what was that about?
Apparently, the schools do it all the time. We didn't arrange it. We just, because we were wandering, we were literally moving, we didn't know what village we would go to. It depended on, some villages didn't want us in there. They were scared of us. They didn't want somebody who would ask questions. So we were just wandering through the Sundarbans. There were certain places I wanted to go, but with the villages, we would kind of send out feelers and see what was happening. And that play was happening at that school. We didn't set that up. We didn't organize that. And these local schools, just like our local schools, regularly organize things around the environment because they get it. They're not even teaching the kids as much as just kind of reenacting what they know to be their life.
Yeah. My students, I teach at Pace University too, a documentary course, and every year we go somewhere and make a film about a conservation issue. And we were in Baja in Mexico a couple of years ago, did a film on sea turtle conservation in a same kind of situation where there was a poor community, they're fishing, they need to make money, they have to catch their fish. Scientists are trying to figure out better ways for them to fish to avoid drowning turtles. They have a turtle festival. The kids are dressed up as sea turtles as well. It was very reminiscent of that. They're engaged with the diversity
When
around
people
them.
ask if there's hope, that's what you think about, isn't it? There is hope. There's huge amounts of hope. And there's hope because of some of the kinds of attitudes and scenes which we didn't plant in their heads. We just have to be able to help them realize some of what they know to be true already and make their lives a little easier and a little more worthwhile because they want to save these animals.
Yeah, so if there are questions out there, raise your hand. I'll point you and I'll repeat your question so that we can be sure. Way in the back, and then the woman with the blue jacket right there. Oh, there are mics, good, even better. And feel free, if you have to go, feel free. No worries. Just go to panthera.org when you get home.
Panthera, not
Panthera.
or it's a rock
Sorry.
group.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Thank you, first of all. Extraordinary. I actually have two major points, but the first one, I'll start with the fact that over 40 years ago, I spent a good amount of time in Calcutta, where I first learned about the Sundarbans from some Bengali friends who actually, at those days, went down there with the wish of seeing or hearing tigers, because it was quite mythological. And one gent did tell me that though he never saw one, he did hear it, and he more or less politely said it was something almost at the realm of causing him to soil his trousers, just the sound of the thing in the jungle. But I did read a number of books at the time when I lived there by the famous Jim Corbett, who, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he was a Britisher born in India who became very involved with the wildlife and so on. But he was living up more in the Himachal Pradesh area and so on. He described cases where, because he was like the great white hunter, that these villages that were being plagued by man-eaters would call him in. And, you know, he goes into great detail about the whole psychology of hunting these man-eaters and so on. But the thing that struck me was that he indicated that almost invariably there was a certain issue. Why did they eat humans? One is that usually the tigers that were man-eaters had some kind of debilitation of some sort that caused them not to be able to eat their usual prey, and that humans were easier to prey upon. Or that some of them had grown up as cubs and so on, eating of the flesh, and were sort of accustomed. Now, I'm wondering, does that make any sense to you based on what these villages were talking about?
It makes total sense. I know Jim Corbett's work very well. In fact, Jim Corbett is one of the people just see him as a man who killed leopards and tigers when there was a case of an animal killing livestock or actually killing people. Jim Corbett is the first one to say one kill of a tiger or a leopard doesn't a man-eater make. He would not classify a cat as a man-eater unless it had killed at least 3 times, unless that same cat had killed 3 times, had killed livestock or a person, usually a person, 3 times. And he was the first one. When I studied jaguars in the 80s, the early 1980s, people thought that any jaguar seeing a cow will kill it. Any tiger seeing a cow, seeing cattle, will kill it. It's not true. They're around until we finally were able to put radio collars on these animals. And we were able to actually track them and prove that they roam among people all the time. Tigers live among people all the time without people seeing them. Mountain lions outside of San Francisco, out in California, where there's no hunting, thousands of them live among people watching them all the time without ever causing any problems. When I started investigating, when I would then be called in on cattle killers, on jaguars in this case, causing problems, every single animal, to an animal, well, actually except one young one, had old gunshot wounds, had broken canines, couldn't survive normally. The actual act of people shooting at the animals with shotguns in order to prevent them from coming near was creating conflict instead of mitigating it. That was done in the 80s. We know this really well now. Most big cats, more than almost any other, big cats can live with people. It's a much harder case, frankly, which is sad, trying to save elephants and rhinos, because they can't as easily sneak by people and have corridors and not cause damage just by walking by you. It's a problem. Big cats, amazingly, can live among people, live really well among people. And that's their hope, is that we can show, and people who live with big cats know this. They all know it. They just want it so that not all of their cattle are being killed, or that their livestock, that they're not losing all their family wealth, or that their child is still safe going and getting water. We can mitigate those things. We can build wells. We can build corrals. We can mitigate almost 80 to 90% of most cat-human conflict. So yes, what you say is Corbett was one of the early, because Corbett knew big cats better than almost anybody at the time. He really stalked them and hunted them. He was one of those first people to identify that.
So the woman in the blue right there, we're just raising your hand. Yeah.
I wanted to thank you for doing all this research and for your great passion to save the cats.
Thank you.
I've read several of your books and heard you speak before. I have a question of how can you distribute this? How will you distribute this film? And what is your idea for creating a corridor through such heavily populated areas?
Okay, the distribution, who's here with George Butler? The distribution I can't address, because that's all in the hands of George. We are in the year of film festival. I know nothing about this. I actually swore off documentaries until I met George Butler. Simply, I had done them for National Geographic and BBC and Animal Planet, and I had just realized, I think they're wonderful. I loved working with all those crews, but I wasn't feeling that they were making any difference. I was feeling that most wildlife documentaries are watched by the already converted, and that frankly, they weren't changing anything for Panthera, for wildlife. I hadn't seen a change in 30 years, despite innumerable beautiful documentaries. George Butler convinced me he would make something different. He would make, because I wanted to get at people and move people on a human level as well as a wildlife level that weren't normally moved by wildlife, that normally didn't watch wildlife. That's our hope. I think George did a good job. I think it's a pretty good film. I've now seen it like 50 times, but I think it's pretty good. It's in the year of film festivals, which apparently is the normal process it goes through. We're up for a big award right now at the Jackson Hole Film Festival for Conservation Hero, which we'll know about at the end of this month. We've been in many other film festivals. He's planning on going to others. Then his hope Is anyone here with George? Oh, why don't you speak to it? There you are. Oh, I thought you had left.
6 months to a year
Okay.
to have the film made available publicly on some format, Netflix or on-demand DVD. So it will be available. Just keep your eyes and ears open and keep to your Facebook.
Isn't he though trying to get it into the theaters possibly first?
Ideally, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a tough market for documentaries
Yeah.
theatrically, but if we can find a market, then we'll definitely get in there.
Well, television, yeah. Is there any prospect of it being seen in Bangladesh or India?
Well, that's what we're also trying. Look, our dire hope is not to. This takes a little extra funding, which we don't have right now.
Yeah.
But what we want to do, which is apart from the whole fundraising and trying to make awareness in the West, is get this film out into Asia, get it into China in particular.
Right.
Maybe even we talked about maybe even making some alterations to it to talk more about the wildlife trade, the Chinese medicinal trade, because it's a very important issue, something that shouldn't be denigrated the way it is normally in the West. Chinese medicine is not something to denigrate. It's got validity to it. Maybe not the tiger bones, but the tiger bones has as much validity as communion does.
Yeah.
When you think you're eating the body of Christ and the blood of Christ.
Right.
Seriously, look how important that is to the Christian sacrament. And people say, well, did they think something as stupid as that? Why? It's not stupid.
Yeah.
It's part of embedded 5,000-year-old folklore that changes somebody internally the way the sacrament changes people internally.
Before the next question, which I don't know if you already have someone picked out there, I want to ask you quickly, though, about the crime element. Especially in Bangladesh, this seemed to be more of a Wild West thing. Is this area basically avoided? So many parts of the wildlife trafficking chain include crime and subversive elements, separatist elements. Is this area just sort of like so isolated that it's avoided some of that so far?
Yeah, well, it was,
So
except
far?
it's not now.
Yeah.
It's not, we're actually getting groups in there. Even if people don't go in there themselves, they will arm villages with traps and not machine guns here, but traps. When something's worth so much money, I mean, there are parks in India where it's a shoot to kill policy. If you're a poacher, you can be shot and killed, especially up in Kaziranga in the northeast, in Arunachal and Assam. It doesn't matter. People still go after, because if you're dirt poor and you'll take a chance so that your daughter will have a dowry or your son can have a bride, then you will do it. And the tigers are being hammered everywhere that they exist. And one thing conservation it's been a long time for them to realize is that conservationists shouldn't be training people in the forest about how not to poach. Finally, it's been knocked into our heads. And we've now hired Panthera in particular, but other groups are doing it now as well. Panthera's hired special forces. These are people, believe it or not, we've had many British SAS, US Army Rangers, many special forces and policemen who were tired of what they're doing in particular, or how they're being told how to do it, who want to use their expertise to save something, to help wildlife and the world. We now have a Tiger Task Force of special forces units who go out and train. They don't go shoot people or do anything, but they train. In Bangladesh, those men didn't even know how to clean their guns. They had never shot their guns. They didn't know how to shoot, they didn't know how to clean it, and yet they're taking bullets. So part of it, yes, people have to be educated, people have to learn, we have to try to put a damper on the trade, but first and foremost, you have to use laws and use law enforcement and lock up places pretty well with the idea that eventually, as I said in the film, and I believe now more than ever, you'll never save anything unless the people who live with those things truly believe they should be living with it. But you still have to have law enforcement. There's never going to be a world where you'll have zero murder and zero rape. And there'll never be a world where you have zero poaching. So we just have to have some balance.
So we have only time for one more question, and sorry?
Oh, sorry. Corridors. Thank you for reminding me.
Yes, sorry, yeah.
The corridor, I'm sorry, I go on too much. We don't know. That's the short answer, because what it's going to involve, which right now is pretty far advanced for Bangladesh, it would involve reforestation, which is easy. That could be done. We can get money for that. USAID is pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into Bangladesh. But what it also would involve is relocation. And that's not so easy. Actually, many of the people would do it, would willingly do it. But in Bangladesh, to be quite frank with you, we're confronting something I've confronted in my 30 years over and over again, but it's pretty bad in Bangladesh, is a level of corruption and broken government which has been happening for decades and decades that we just cannot seem to get a handle on for the time being. Even USAID, who's just committed $400 million there into the Sundarbans, is now thinking of pulling out. And we're telling them, don't pull out. Let us help you to see where to focus and monitor it. But they're not good at focusing and monitoring. But it's really difficult. But it's not things change. Politics changes. Things change. I've been through this in Indonesia, in Thailand, in China. It's not easy any place in the world. It's pretty rough in Bangladesh, though, I've got to admit. It's pretty hard gaining almost any traction there, but we're trying.
So we have that one more question, but anyone else has a question? I'm going to be doing a piece on .earth, my New York Times blog, about the film, and tonight it might not run for a week or so. So revkin@gmail.com. Send me your questions. I'll forward them to Alan, and you'll be able to get them answered. But we have the one on the record one here. Right? Wait for the microphone.
Thanks. Hi, Alan. Thank you so much for the film and for your talk and the work that you do. Two things quickly. Could you tell us a little bit about other areas that Panthera is working in, other areas around the world that your projects are? And two, I'm just curious whether the Wildlife Crimes Division of Interpol has helped you at all.
The Wildlife Crimes Division of Interpol is doing quite a good job. They're really starting to get their stride. Panthera in particular is not working with them because, well, we could and probably will more in the future. But they also focus on a certain kind of police action that Panthera per se doesn't do, but will feed them information, will feed them things. So there are certain things that we can't easily do if we want to stay in a country and still have our MOUs and relationships with the government, but we can always feed. We're often in the weeds and on the ground more than anybody else and in remote areas, so we'll feed information. Right now, Panthera is in we have over 100 and, help me here, my staff, over 130 people, I think, in over 70 countries. We're working on all the big cats. The cats we are emphasizing on, due to funding restrictions and other things, has been historically jaguars, tigers, lions, and now we are getting into a big leopard program, a big I Fake It campaign with Shania Twain, of all people. But she's been great because Shania she really cares. We're getting into cheetahs for the first time. People who don't work for Panthera often are on Panthera's advisory. All the big cat experts, Laurie Marker of cheetahs and all those people, they're all on our advisory board working with Panthera in some way or another. So we do also have a small cat program because so little is known about small cats. So few people know how to study them, what to do with them. And if people want to work on them, we give grants for working on small cats too. But our main focus are the umbrella species, frankly, are the apex predators. for a good reason. Not because a tiger is more beautiful than any. When I think of what I've done to set aside protected areas, I don't think, oh, I've saved this many tigers, this many jaguars. I think, great, we have the Burmese tortoise now protected up in northern Burma. We have monarch butterflies better protected in Mexico. I think of the snakes and the insects and all those animals, which no way are we going to get preserves for just working on one by one or going to. I have never been able to meet, I have never been able not to meet either a head of state or at the very least a minister of environment by working on big cats. No way will I get those meetings, even working on monkeys, which are beautiful. But I'll save the monkeys through the big cats.
Yeah. Well, thank you enormously. And I think a quick additional round of applause for your wife and your two children who are sitting here for letting you go
My
so
wife,
much.
who was put up with
Exactly.
how many years? Too many.
Yeah,
30 plus years,
Yeah.
30 years, and
because
my 2 children.
it's remarkable the work you do. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Of course.
Organizing this.
Thank you all for coming.
Yeah.
Thanks so
Yeah,
much,
thank
Dawn.
you, yeah. So if you guys go to their website, there's actually an action center. If you want to hold your own fundraiser, that's really a great way to get involved and help and just get the word out. And you can stay tuned for, these are all actually all of our partners that helped us. Bonnie Wiper is here from Thinking Animals, and we had some really great partners in this initiative and the COP21 BioClimate initiative. So if you go to our website, columbiasd.org, you can sign the petition, and I'll send an email out to everybody. Have a great night.